The average woman in 1950s America was not thin because she had more willpower than you. She was not waking up at 5 in the morning to count her macros. She was not following a 10-week transformation plan or drinking meal replacement shakes at her kitchen counter. She did not have a gym membership, a fitness tracker, or a shelf full of supplements with complicated names. And yet, when you look at photographs from that era, women at backyard cookouts, women on city sidewalks, women standing in church parking lots, the same thing keeps showing up. Lean arms, straight posture, bodies that simply looked like they were being used well. For decades, people looked at those photographs and assumed those women had something modern women have lost: grit, self-control, a certain moral seriousness about how you carry yourself. The idea stuck. It became a kind of cultural shorthand: the disciplined housewife, the woman who never let herself go, the generation that just knew better. But that story is wrong, or at least it is missing the most important part. Those women were not leaner because they were stronger-willed. They were leaner because their world made it almost impossible to be otherwise. The environment they lived inside every single day had limits built into it. Quiet, structural, invisible limits that modern life has almost completely removed. And once those limits disappeared, no amount of willpower was going to replace them on its own. If that sounds like a relief, it should. Because the question was never really about discipline. It was always about design. If you want to keep learning about the forgotten systems that kept older homes and older bodies running more smoothly than ours often do today, subscribe before we go any further, and tell us where you are watching from. Whether you grew up in a small American town where the grocery store closed at 6, or somewhere else entirely where your grandmother ran her kitchen like a clock, drop it in the comments. We would love to know. The first and most important limit was food access. Not food quality, not macronutrients, not organic versus conventional. Just simple physical access to food. In the early 1950s, the average American family did one grocery run per week. Just one grocery run, only one. The car, if the family had one, went to the store on Saturday or maybe Friday afternoon. And whatever came home in those brown paper bags was what the household had to work with until the following week. There was no popping out for a snack. There was no app on a phone that would deliver a warm meal to the front door in 30 minutes. There was no convenience store on every corner stocked with individually wrapped cookies and protein bars, and flavored drinks in 14 varieties. The pantry in a 1950s kitchen was a practical thing. It had flour, sugar, canned vegetables, dried beans, a tin of coffee, maybe a box of crackers. It had what the family needed to cook real meals. It did not have a dedicated shelf for impulse snacks, because those products barely existed yet. The snack food industry was still in its early years. Processed convenience foods were beginning to appear, but they were limited. They cost money a lot of families did not have to spare. And they were not yet the background noise of daily life the way they are now. This meant something very specific for how people ate. If you were hungry at 2 in the afternoon, and there was nothing ready to eat in the house, you waited. Not because you were disciplined, because there was nothing there. The absence of the option was the limit. Nobody had to exercise restraint over a bag of chips that did not exist on their counter. Think about your own home right now. Walk through it in your mind. How many places could you get something to eat? Without any preparation at all? The fruit bowl, the snack cabinet, the fridge with its leftovers, and its cheese and its yogurt cups, the freezer, that bag of something on the coffee table, the pantry with its crackers and its peanut butter. Modern homes are surrounded by food from every angle, and the effort required to eat something has been reduced to almost nothing. You reach, you open, you eat. The friction between wanting food and having food has essentially been removed. In 1950, that friction existed. It was not a virtue. It was just the way things were. The grocery trip happened once a week. The pantry held practical staples. And the space between meals was empty in a way that modern kitchens almost never are. That empty space was doing something. It was controlling intake without anyone having to think about it, track it, or resist anything at all. And the limits on what came into the house were only the beginning. Because once the food was there, the timing of when it was eaten followed its own strict set of rules. Rules that nobody had to write down because the whole household ran on the same clock. Breakfast was at 7, lunch was at noon. Dinner was at 6, and that was it. Not as a diet strategy. Not as a trendy eating window with a name and a book behind it. Just as the shape of the day. The rhythm of the household ran on a fixed schedule. And food was part of that schedule the same way church on Sunday or laundry on Monday was part of it. Meals happened at certain times because life happened at certain times, and everything else arranged itself around that structure, without anyone deciding to make it a health decision. The kitchen opened in the morning and it closed at night. After dinner was cleared, after the dishes were done and the counters were wiped, the kitchen was finished for the day. There was no return trip at 9 o'clock for something sweet. There was no standing in front of the open refrigerator at 10:30 trying to decide whether you were actually hungry or just bored. The meal was done, the kitchen was closed, and the evening moved on to other things. That was the unspoken rule in house after house across the country. And it held not because women were disciplined about it, but because the day simply did not have room for anything else. Between meals, there was very little eating. Snacking as a habit, as something people did routinely between breakfast and lunch, or between lunch and dinner, was not the automatic reflex it has become today. Children sometimes got a small afternoon snack, maybe an apple or a piece of bread. But the grazing pattern that defines modern eating, the open bag of something next to the laptop, the handful of crackers while standing at the counter, the constant low-level intake that adds up across a day without ever feeling like a meal, that did not exist in the same way. Partly because the food wasn't there, and partly because the idea of eating outside of mealtimes carried a mild social awkwardness in many households. You waited. The table was where eating happened, and the table had a schedule. Did your grandmother have a rule about eating between meals? Something she said without even raising her voice, just a look or a short sentence that meant the kitchen was not open for browsing? A lot of people remember exactly that. Drop it in the comments. It is one of those small things that shaped everything without anyone thinking of it as a system. The plates themselves were smaller. This is not a detail worth dismissing. A standard dinner plate in the 1950s measured around 9 inches across. Today, the average dinner plate runs closer to 12 inches, and restaurant plates are often larger still. The brain fills the plate. When the plate is smaller, the portion looks complete. When the plate is larger, the same amount of food looks like a light start. Portion sizes did not expand because people got greedier. They expanded because the dishes got bigger, and the food industry learned that more food on the plate felt like better value, which sold more meals. In a 1950s kitchen, the serving dish came to the table and people took what they took. Seconds were not automatic. They required getting up, going back to the stove, and making a deliberate choice. That small physical step was a pause, not a wall, but a moment of separation between the first plate and the possibility of another one. Many people never made it past that pause, not because they were watching their intake, but because the pause itself was enough to let the first plate settle. Cooking from scratch added its own friction. When a meal required genuine time and effort, peeling, chopping, measuring, watching the stove, the relationship between hunger and food was different. You did not eat a full home-cooked dinner and then immediately want more, because the meal had substance and the cooking itself had taken something out of you. The effort involved in producing the food was part of the experience of eating it. Fast food and ultra-processed convenience meals changed that equation completely. Food that requires almost no effort to obtain or prepare seems to satisfy something less deeply. And the research on satiety and processed foods has been pointing in that direction for years now. The fixed meal schedule, the closed kitchen, the smaller plate, the scratch-cooked food. None of these were conscious weight management tools. They were just the ordinary shape of daily domestic life. But together, they created a natural container for how much a person ate across a day. The container was not dramatic. It did not require motivation or tracking. It was simply the structure that the day already had. And while the kitchen was doing its quiet work, the rest of the house was doing something else entirely. Something that modern appliances have almost completely taken away, so gradually that most people never noticed what disappeared along with the effort. Nobody called it exercise. That word, in the context of daily health, barely meant what it means now. There were no fitness classes to sign up for, no running shoes engineered for pronation support, no YouTube workouts queued up on a laptop balanced against the couch cushions. Women in the 1950s were not exercising, they were just living. And living in that era, inside that kind of house, required a continuous and significant amount of physical effort that modern life has quietly engineered out of existence. Start with the laundry. An automatic washing machine, if the family had one, still required loading, unloading, and carrying. But the dryer was far from universal. Clothes came out of the wash and went onto the line, outside in warm weather, on an indoor rack in winter. That meant lifting a full wet basket, carrying it across the yard or down the stairs, bending and reaching and pinning item after item, then coming back later to take it all down, fold it, sort it, and carry it back upstairs. Do that for a family of 4 or 5, and you have covered more functional movement in a single morning than many people manage in a full day now. The body was working, the heart rate was moving, nobody logged it, nobody counted it, it was just Tuesday. The floors were swept and mopped by hand, the rugs were taken outside and beaten, windows were cleaned with a cloth and vinegar water, leaning and stretching and working from corner to corner. Bathrooms were scrubbed on hands and knees. These were not light tasks done occasionally. They ran on a weekly rhythm, the same chores on the same days, because a house that size with that many people in it required constant attention to stay ahead of the mess. The physical demand of keeping a home in those years was real and sustained. It was not a workout, but it functioned like one. Groceries came home in bags that had to be carried. In many neighborhoods, women walked to the butcher, to the bakery, to the greengrocer. Separate stops, separate trips, separate loads to carry back. The car was not always available. In many single-car households, the husband drove to work, and the car was simply gone until evening. Walking was not a lifestyle choice or a wellness practice. It was how you got somewhere when the car wasn't there, and it happened multiple times a week, loaded down with things that needed carrying. Inside the kitchen, the physical work continued, stirring thick batters by hand, kneading bread dough on the counter, rolling out pastry, washing every dish and pot in the sink. Because the dishwasher, if it existed at all, was a luxury most households did not have until the late 1950s or into the 1960s. Washing dishes for a family after a full cooked meal is not trivial work. Hands in hot water, scrubbing, rinsing, drying, stacking. 10 or 15 minutes of steady standing and working, done 3 times a day. Back in the 1950s, children were frequently sent outside to play. This matters less to the woman herself, but it matters to the shape of the household. There were no tablets, no streaming queues, no video games pulling everyone into a chair. When children went outside, adults often followed or at least stayed on their feet managing the household, rather than sitting to supervise a screen. The house was not a place people sank into. It was a place people moved through. Now this is the moment to be honest about something. That physical labor was hard. For many women, it was exhausting in ways that were never acknowledged or compensated fairly. The workload was relentless, the expectations were rigid, and the idea that a woman's day was made up of pleasant domestic movement ignores the reality that it was often backbreaking and invisible. The point here is not to say that women were lucky to be scrubbing floors. The point is to notice what that physical reality did to the body, without anyone planning for it, and to see clearly how much of it has disappeared. A modern home runs on appliances that absorbed every one of those movement moments. The dryer eliminated the line, the dishwasher eliminated the sink, the robot vacuum eliminated the sweeping, the grocery delivery eliminated the walk, the car eliminated the errand on foot. Each of these things is genuinely convenient, and nobody is suggesting you go back to beating rugs in the backyard as a fitness strategy. But when you add up everything that disappeared, what you see is that the house itself used to be a movement system. The architecture of daily domestic life kept the body active for hours every day, without a single conscious decision to exercise. That movement is gone now, and nothing has fully replaced it. A 30-minute gym session 3 times a week does not recover what a full day of physical household work provided across 6 days. The math simply does not work out. And the women who were doing that work were not thinking about burning calories. They were thinking about getting the wash done before it rained. When the work was finally finished and the evening arrived, the body that had moved all day was ready for something the modern body rarely achieves as cleanly. It was ready for actual rest. Evening came early in a 1950s household. Not because the family was tired in some weak or defeated way, but because the day had actually been used. The body had moved through real physical work since morning. The meals had been cooked and eaten at their proper times. The kitchen was closed for the night, leaving only the quiet hum of the vintage fridge. The children were bathed and in bed at a reasonable hour, and when the last lamp in the living room went off, it went off because there was genuinely nothing left pulling anyone awake. Electric light existed, of course, but television programming ended. Radio had its schedule. There was no infinite scroll waiting behind a glowing rectangle on the nightstand. No autoplay feature serving up one more episode, no notification pulling the eye back to a screen at 11:30 at night. The darkness came, and the body responded to it the way bodies are actually built to respond, by winding down, by cooling, by moving towards sleep without having to fight through 2 more hours of artificial stimulation first. Sleep in that era was not a wellness trend. It was not something people optimized with mouth tape and weighted blankets and magnesium supplements. It was simply what happened when the day ended and the light went out. And that kind of sleep, earlier, darker, quieter, less interrupted, does something to the body's hunger hormones that modern sleep patterns consistently fail to replicate. When the body is genuinely rested, appetite regulation works more smoothly. The signals that say full and the signals that say still hungry operate the way they are supposed to. When sleep is short, broken, or pushed late into the night, those signals get distorted, and the body starts reaching for food to compensate for energy it did not recover during rest. Nobody in 1950 knew that. The science was not there yet. But the structure of the day produced the outcome anyway. The same way a well-designed room produces calm without the person inside it having to try to feel calm. The design did the work. The rhythm carried the result. Late-night eating was nearly impossible in that environment, and this matters more than it might seem. The kitchen was closed. The house was dark. The food that existed required preparation, and nobody was getting up at midnight to cook something from scratch. The barrier between wanting food late at night and actually getting it was high enough that the impulse simply passed. The body moved toward sleep instead of toward the refrigerator. And that nightly fast, the long, uninterrupted gap between dinner and breakfast, was kept without anyone naming it, tracking it, or building a plan around it. Stress was real in the 1950s. The pressures on women in that era were substantial and often invisible. Financial worry, domestic expectations that left no room for error, social rules that kept many women locked into roles they never chose. Stress eating existed then the same way it exists now, because it is a human response, not a modern invention. But the food environment did not enable it the way today's does. When the pantry held flour and canned goods and not much else, and when the kitchen was closed and the house was dark, the opportunity to eat through anxiety was simply not there in the same way. The emotion existed, the outlet was limited by the environment. That combination, the closed kitchen, the dark house, the earlier bedtime, the long overnight fast, the body that had genuinely worked all day, created a daily cycle that managed weight and energy, without a single conscious health decision being made. No tracking app, no calorie target, no macro split written on the refrigerator door. The system ran because the structure of the day ran, and the structure ran because it had been built that way by necessity, by habit, by the ordinary demands of keeping a household going. Which of these would be hardest to bring back in your own life? The fixed meal times, the closed kitchen after dinner, the earlier sleep, the phone off the nightstand? It is worth sitting with that question honestly, because the answer usually points directly at the limit that is doing the most damage. Modern life did not only give freedom, it also gave frictionless access to food at every hour, light that defeats the body's natural signals, screens that push sleep 2 hours later than it should be, appliances that removed the movement the body used to get for free, and a food industry that filled every empty moment with something to eat or drink or order. Each change arrived as a convenience. Together, they dismantled a system that had been working quietly for generations, without anyone realizing it was a system at all. The women in those photographs were not exceptional. They were not harder or purer or more virtuous than anyone living now. They were ordinary people moving through a world that had limits built into its walls, its schedules, its pantries, and its darkness. The limits did the work. The women just lived inside them. That is the part that got lost, not the discipline, the design. And the encouraging thing, the part worth holding on to, is that design can be rebuilt. Not all of it, and not overnight, and not by pretending the past was easier than it was, but one limit at a time. A kitchen that closes after dinner, a plate that is slightly smaller, a phone that goes face down an hour before bed, a walk taken because the errand is close enough. Small structural choices that do the quiet work willpower was never meant to carry alone. If this brought something back, a grandmother's kitchen, a house that ran on a rhythm you still remember, a simpler way of eating that didn't have a name, subscribe before you go. There are more forgotten systems worth remembering, and the next one is already waiting.